Alright, welcome back everybody to the Cyclonic Thrift channel. We've got another budget deck tech for you. This one coming out of the recent Doctor Who Commander decks. I don't know how familiar all of you out there are with Doctor Who. I know for me, I have a very limited scope. I definitely watched Doctors 9 through 11, and I'm personally a David Tennant Doctor fan. But I was really struck by some of the cards in this deck. There were a few that I kind of was sifting through and debating about building a deck for, but the one that I landed on, I think, was just the most intriguing. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about the specific character, so if anybody knows anything or has some tips as to why the card is constructed the way it is, whether it, how it relates to the actual character, please let me know in the comments. But without further ado, let's get into it. The commander we'll be looking at today is me. And no, they did not make a Cyclonic Thrift card. That one already exists. It's called Cyclonic Rift. If you don't know about it, go look it up. It's pretty good. It's kind of what this channel's name is based off of. But no, the commander we're looking at today is called me, the Immortal. She's 2 green, blue, red for a legendary creature, human rogue, 3/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put your choice of a +1/+1, first strike, vigilance, or menace counter on me, the Immortal. Counters remain on me as it moves to any zone other than a player's hand or library. And you may cast me from your graveyard by discarding 2 cards in addition to paying its other costs. So immediately when I saw this, I thought of Skullbriar, right? The Golgari commander. You put +1/+1 counters on it, they stay on that even if it goes to the command zone, the graveyard, that sort of thing. But I think there's a little bit of an upside here. Now, one, it costs a lot more, right? 5 versus 2 is no joke. But this one, because it gives you that versatility on the first ability, right? You can add different types of counters, and the fact that you're able to cast it from your graveyard instead of having to always cast it from the command zone is super intriguing. So again, there are a couple different ways you could take this deck. I'm going to kind of walk through 3 main strategies. The first being just +1/+1 counters right across the board. The second being Voltron-y, kind of trying to make this me, big old commander, keeping all the counters on her as she moves from zone to zone, swinging in for a lot of damage. And then the third being proliferation, right? So we have lots of cards that'll put +1/+1 counters, put other types of counters onto cards, but once they're on there, we want to proliferate them, especially the +1/+1s, obviously. So without further ado, let's get into the first set of strategies. First card we'll talk about here is Commi of Whispered Hopes. It's 2 and a green for a creature's spirit. It's a 1/1. And if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, that many +1/+1 counters, or that many +1/+1 counters are put on that permanent instead. And then you tap to add X mana of any one color, where X is Commi of Whispered Hope's power. So this is just a standard +1/+1 counter deck card, right? Anytime you're able to kind of double, or at least add 1 to the counters that you're adding onto creatures or permanents, it's going to stack. It's a stack ability, super helpful. But the fact that we'll be able to then tap this, create it essentially as a mana dork, and a mana dork that scales with the game, right? As we put more +1/+1 counters on our creatures, including the Commi, as we proliferate, as we get their power higher, this thing could conceivably end up tapping for 6-7 mana at some point, which is just going to lead to an explosive turn, and something that we'll be super interested in having. Now the next card, you guys might not remember, but it's the Forgotten Ancient. It's 3 and a green for a creature elemental, 0/3. Whenever a player casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Forgotten Ancient. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of +1/+1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures. This is perfect. Not only is this just going to accumulate +1/+1 counters throughout the game, right? Players, I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint here. A little bit of insider trading on the whole Magic community. Magic players like casting spells. It's kind of important for the gameplay. So when they cast their spells, and we get to put extra +1/+1 counters on this thing, it's gonna get out of control pretty fast. Basically, I'd say, I mean, you get this down right, turn 4, and then you have 3 players go after you in a turn cycle. Let's say each player casts between 1 and 2 spells. By the time it gets to your upkeep, this thing could very easily have 5-6 counters on it. And then you're able to move those counters onto other creatures, right? And it's not all onto one creature. You get to split it up however you want. Now, if Me is out there on the field, you're going to want to move all those counters onto her for the safekeeping, you know? But if she's not, and you want to throw it all on Commi to then have Commi be able to tap for 6 mana, right? That's something you can do and something that'll be helpful. And the last card here, this is completely new to me. I know it came out not too long ago, but it's Agent's Toolkit. It's 1, a green and a blue for an artifact clue, which is super interesting. It enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, a flying counter, a death touch counter, and a shield counter on it. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may move a counter from Agent's Toolkit onto that creature. So, yeah, this is just super interesting. You play it down, it comes in with all these things on it, and then as you play other creatures, you get to pick and choose which counter you want to do. And the best part is, to be honest, is that all of these counters are counters, aside from the +1/+1, are counters that our commander does not already have the option of putting on herself. So the flying counter, the death touch counter, the shield counter are unique. And yeah, to avoid the redundancy there is super nice. And it also has pay 2, sacrifice it to draw a card. That's basically, you know, whenever you lose all the counters on it, you're not able to blink it, just get rid of it, you know, get it out of there, draw a card, get some value, and you'll be good to go. All right, now moving on to the second category here, looking to maybe win the game through commander damage, a Voltron type of style. We have some cards that are going to help us do that. The first is Vorik Battle Horns. It's a 2-mana artifact equipment. An equipped creature has trample and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. And it has equip 1. This is another card I honestly did not know existed. But the ability to give trample and I don't even know what you would call this ability of only being able to be blocked by 1 creature or less. But that's going to be super powerful in this deck. With me already being a 3/3, you know we're going to pump her to the moon with all these +1/+1 counters. And then this thing, you get it down turn 2, it's equip 1. Like the cheapness of this ability, I think, surprised me the most. That it's going to work so perfectly with this commander. Plus, it gives trample, which is something our commander can't give to herself. And speaking of counters that our commander can't give to herself, the next card is Slippery Bog Bonder. It's 3 and a green for a 3/3 creature human druid. Has flash and hexproof. When it enters the battlefield, we put a hexproof counter on target creature, aka our commander. And then we move any number of counters, from among creatures you control onto that creature. So, yeah, you know, we throw this down early. We want to have our commander out before we put this down, obviously. We want the hexproof counter on me, on the card me. Because, again, it's going to stick around as it moves from zone to zone. You know, putting it on a different creature, sure, maybe, if we want to, but the value is going to be putting it on me, the Immortal. But then we get to put basically every counter from among creatures we control onto me. It's going to potentially allow for a game-ending turn, right? It also has flash, right? So you swing in, you know, maybe me's a 6/6, right? And you've got some other creatures out there that have +1/+1 counters, but you quote-unquote hold them back for blocks or whatever. They declare no blocks. You flash this in, move all your counters onto the unblocked me, and take a guy out in one swing. that is a situation I can very much see happening and would be very satisfying to have with this deck. And then the last card here is actually super simple. It's Invigorating Surge. It's 2 and a green for an instant. You put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, then double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature. Fits with the theme. There's not really a whole lot to explain here. But any type of doubling of our counters is going to be super nice. All right, moving into the final category here is Proliferation. So there's a lot, especially with the recent set releases of Phyrexia All Will Be One, March of the Machines, all that stuff. There's been a lot of support given to Proliferation in the realm of Infect, right? Boo, bad strategy, nobody likes it. And so unfortunately I've had to kind of commandeer some of those cards, bring them in here. We are not going Infect. Let me be clear. We're not going Infect here, not going poison counters. We're simply trying to proliferate the counters that we have on our own creatures. So the first one here is Thrumming Bird. It's 1 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian bird horror. It's a 1/1 with flying. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you proliferate. So this is nice. Get it down early, swing it in, has flying, so it's got some evasion. It also can be a bit of a politics piece, to be honest, right? You get late in the game, maybe it's kind of 2-on-1. You and another player are trying to gang up on this guy, take him down, maybe he's gotten too powerful. You say, hey, let me deal 1 combat damage to you with this guy, and I can use that proliferation to hurt our common enemy here. There's a lot of things you can do with this, but it's just going to be a super solid card. The next one here is Contagion Clasp. It's 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. Then you can pay 4, tap it, and proliferate. So yeah, it's just a nice repeatable form of proliferation. Maybe a little bit on the pricey side, but you know, if you've got that mana sitting around, you've got commi tapping for 15, you know, that sort of thing. It'll be nice to have this on the battlefield to sink that mana into and get a very powerful effect depending on how big your board state is. And then the final card here is Taset Gambit. It's 3 and a Phyrexian blue, so you can pay blue or 2 life. And you draw 2 cards and then proliferate. Super simple. We've got quite a few instants and sorceries that kind of have this, where you have an ability and then proliferation is kind of tacked onto the end here. So we're not losing anything in terms of our normal strategies of card draw, removal, that sort of thing. But we get the added bonus of also being able to proliferate with our cards. Alright, that gets us to the veggie portion of this deck. As always, budget decks have to eat their veggies. If you aren't adhering strictly to these categories of ramp, card draw, and removal, you are not going to be able to have a consistent enough result from your deck to be able to compete with these higher power, higher budget decks that have access to cards and abilities and strategies that you can't really touch on a budget. So it's super important that we include all of these cards and make sure that our ramp is taken care of. And so there's a lot of ramp in this deck. I'm going to talk specifically about our creature ramp for a reason that we will get to later. But the first one is a card we've already talked about before, and that's Commi of Whispered Hopes. Again, the potential of getting this super big and tapping for a lot of mana is too tempting in this type of a deck. And it's going to be super common to have this thing tap for 4, 5, 6 mana before, you know, your opponents remove it, because they're like, holy crap, that thing is massive. The next card here is Incubation Druid. It's 1 and a green for a 0/2 creature elf druid. Tap it to add 1 mana of any type that a land you control could produce. So, you know, any of our green, blue, red, that sort of thing. But if Incubation Druid has a +1/+1 counter on it, it adds 3 mana of that type instead. And then it has 3 and 2 green for adapt 3. You can put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. This is super cool because, again, we're putting +1/+1 counters on things by accident. That is basically this whole deck. So the fact that we get a 2-drop here that will eventually tap, you know, once a turn for 3 mana is, yeah, that's just a super high value, super high rate card. Yeah, it's going to work perfectly in this strategy. And then the last card here is Vidiian Joiner. It's 2 and a green for a 1/2 creature elf druid. You tap to add an amount of green to your mana pool equal to Vidiian Joiner's power. It's basically Commi of Whispered Hopes. It's a little bit worse. I totally get that. But it's a card that the redundancy of the strategy is just, it's too nice to pass up. Again, we're going to be pumping these creatures up with +1/+1 counters, making this guy massive. He's going to tap for a ton of mana. Now moving into our card draw strategy here, we've got a couple cards. The first is Inspiring Call. It's 2 and a green for an instant. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. And then those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. This is a super cool card. Fun side note, this card was in my first ever Commander deck. It was a pre-con back in 2019, 2020 maybe 2020. Yeah, and I absolutely loved it then. I love it now in this strategy. Again, it's going to be super common for us to have 4, 5, 6 creatures, all with +1/+1 counters on them. Pay 3 to draw 6 is an insane rate. But then it's also a way to kind of save us from board wipes, right? Board wipes, targeted removal. It's a way to protect our creatures. The versatility on this card is super nice and is going to fit. It fits perfectly into this deck. The next card is Hunter's Insight. It's 2 and a green for an instant. Choose target creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. Oh my goodness. I love this. In any, stompy big creature deck, obviously. But in a Voltron deck where we're trying to make our commander huge, we're going to be doing that incidentally. Again, she's already a 3/3, so if we get her through, pump her up, cast this card, again, not uncommon for us to draw 6 cards off of this. It's gonna be a beautiful thing to play as a combat trick. But both of those cards are, one-offs. Kind of play it, get a big effect, and then they go away. The next one here is Novision Sages. It's 4 and 2 blue for a 0/0 creature human advisor mutant. It has Graft 4. This creature enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you may move a +1/+1 counter from this creature onto it. So this is a beautiful way of, again, starting other creatures out with +1/+1 counters. It's going to get the proliferation strategy online. It's just, this is good. And then the next ability is Pay 1, remove 2 +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control, draw a card. I love the repeatability of this. It's not a ability you're going to want to activate too many times because, removing those counters is not something we want to do when our strategy here is to make them as big as possible. But, if you've got creatures out there that have +1/+1 counters on them, they don't need them, yeah, remove them. Draw a card, get some value. If you're looking for answers, this is an excellent way of having a repeatable card draw strategy on the field. Alright, and now we'll move into the removal category here. The first one is actually a new card from Doctor Who Commander decks. It's Zon Infiltrator. It's 2 and a blue for a 3/2 creature alien shapeshifter soldier. It has body print, which is 2 and a blue. Tap another target creature and put a stun counter on it. Zon Infiltrator becomes a copy of that creature for as long as that creature remains tapped, and activate this only as a sorcery. So this is just a cool ability on its face, right? It's kind of a way to remove a different creature, get it out of the way, remove a blocker, and then also clone, right? Clone our creature as a copy of whatever we want. But the key here is actually that stun counter. We've already discussed we have a lot of proliferation in this deck, and stun counters, they go away when a creature would be untapped, but if there's another stun counter on it, then it's going to just kind of repeat that untappedness, that nature of being untapped, until there are no stun counters on it. So if we just keep proliferating that stun counter, then we're going to keep that creature being tapped, and we're going to keep Zygon's ability active for as long as we want, basically. Next remover here is Canker Bloom. It's 1 and a green for a creature Phyrexian fungus, 3/2. Also, I was so surprised that thing is a 3/2 for 2 mana. Like, if you guys don't feel like power creep is real, a 2 mana 3/2 that has this versatile ability is significant. So just keep note. But the ability is you pay 1 and sacrifice it, and you get to choose 1. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or proliferate, right? So it's that classic removal plus proliferation combo. And the fact that we get to get this down early and then pick and choose our spots when we want to utilize its ability, super helpful. And the last card here is actually kind of a callback to the Zon Infiltrator. It's freeze in place. It's 1 and a blue for a sorcery. Tap target creature an opponent controls and put 3 stun counters on it. Scry 2. So again, this is just a great way of getting someone's blocker down. Maybe they're a combat deck and they need this card to combo off with extra combats. You tap this down, they can't attack with it. And we get to proliferate, right? So this thing is going to stay tapped much longer than 3 turns. It's going to be super helpful here. And alright, that gets us to our Thrift Pick of the deck. There are actually quite a few cards here that I considered putting in this this slot. We actually have a few Meosians with those indestructible counters that we can proliferate and keep, repeating that ability on. Azuri Claw of Progress is super interesting because it also utilizes the +1/+1 counters. But ultimately I went with this card, which on its face seems a little dull, or maybe unassuming is a better word. But the card is Vidiian Graft Mage. It's 2 and a blue for a creature, Vidalcan Wizard Mutant. It's a 0/0 with Graft 2, so that a Graft ability comes on with 2 +1/+1 counters. And you can pay 1 and a blue to untap target creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. Now Keegan, why in the world, it's kind of cool. Maybe we can untap our commander, give her foe vigilance, but she can also give herself vigilance, so why are we, worried about that? Ah, my friend. The world of infinite mana is open to you with this card. So specifically with Incubation Druid and Commi of Whispered Hopes, those are the 2 creatures that if we get their power up, or get +1/+1 counters on them, we'll go with infinite mana. Right, so with Incubation Druid, if we have a +1/+1 counter on it, we tap it for 3 blue, use 2 of the blue to untap it with Vidiian Graft Mage's ability, we net a blue, and then we just do that however we want. And because we'll be able to make infinite blue mana, we'll be able to then also make infinite green and infinite red mana, so infinite mana of whatever color we want to be able to use on our turn. And then on top of that, Commi of Whispered Hopes is kind of the same deal. As long as it's able to tap for 3 or more mana, we can go infinite with it. So this is a card you don't really see a lot of infinite combos in budget decks. It's usually reserved for those higher priced cards, but the fact that this whole combo with Vidiian being about 17 cents and especially Incubation Druid being 56, you get this infinite mana combo for less than $1 combined. That's a pretty good rate. And it's something that I'm super excited to see play out in a game. Alright, that gets us to the end of this video. As always, please let me know if there's any cards that you think I missed or should have included. If you're not already subscribed, please do so. It helps the channel out. Like and share. And yeah, until next time guys, stay thrifty.